Humanity entered the galaxy quietly, late, and unprepared. Their first ships were fragile things, stitched together with optimism and borrowed theories, carrying a species that believed contact meant cooperation. For a brief moment, that belief almost survived. Then the expansion war arrived. It was not declared to humans. No warning was issued, no ultimatum delivered. One cycle, distant stars went dark. The next, colonies stopped responding. Automated relays filled with partial transmissions, static, screams, unfinished sentences. Humanity learned its place in the galactic order the hard way. Insignificant, expendable, not worth the cost of protection. They sent distress calls anyway. To empires with fleets that blotted out suns. To trade unions rich in resources. To councils that claimed stewardship of galactic law. The replies, when they came, were cold and uniform. Strategic non-interest. Insufficient return. Regrettable, but unavoidable. Humanity was advised to surrender worlds quickly to reduce casualties, as if extinction were a clerical inconvenience. As the war rolled forward, human space burned. Orbital stations were cracked open. Agricultural moons were stripped bare. Refugee ships fled with holds packed far beyond safety limits, carrying families who had never seen their homeworlds but would still die defending them. Supplies ran out first. Hope followed. When the final distress call went out, it was not aimed at any major power. It was broadcast blindly, a narrow-band plea sent on outdated frequencies to anyone still listening. Humanity expected silence. Instead, a reply came. The Celt Union was not a power anyone feared. Their territory was small, their technology old by galactic standards. Their worlds were dry, their harvests unreliable. They had no seat of consequence on the councils, no fleets capable of changing wars. By every metric that mattered, they could not afford to help. They did anyway. Celt stations opened their docks to human refugees without negotiation. Civilian habitats were depressurized and rebuilt to make room. Food reserves meant to last winters were rationed down further, shared with strangers who spoke in broken translations and carried nothing but grief. Celt engineers dismantled their own infrastructure to keep human ships running, cannibalizing reactors and life support systems with methodical calm. There were no speeches about heroism. No promises of repayment. Just quiet labor and shared exhaustion. Human children learned to sleep under Celt skies. Human soldiers, stripped of uniforms and purpose, worked Celt fields to earn their keep. In shelters carved into rock, two species waited together as news from the wider galaxy went dark. The war moved on, uninterested in prey that had already escaped its jaws. Eventually, it ended. Not with justice, but with attrition. The expansion front shifted. The aggressors found richer targets. Humanity survived, scattered, and diminished, no longer worth the effort of annihilation. Official records closed the file, losses severe, population reduced, future uncertain. A minor species damaged but persistent. The galaxy moved on. The Celt Union returned to obscurity, poorer than before. Their choice to help humanity brought no reward, only debt and quiet suspicion from neighbors who viewed altruism as inefficiency. Trade slowed. Political influence dwindled. They did not complain. They had done what they believed was right. Humanity did not forget. While rebuilding began, humans archived everything. Names of Celt families who opened their homes. Coordinates of shelters that held during bombardments. Medical logs, ration tallies, casualty lists, who had gone hungry so humans could eat, who had died when supplies ran out. Nothing was abstracted. Nothing was summarized. Children were taught the history not as legend, but as obligation. Officers studied it alongside strategy. Civilian leaders treated it as doctrine. Gratitude was not ceremonial. It was operational. As centuries passed, humanity grew carefully. Shipyards expanded behind neutral trade agreements. Research advanced in quiet layers, never flashy enough to alarm observers. Human diplomats remained polite, non-committal, almost dull. To the wider galaxy, they were recovering, competent, but unremarkable. Only their internal records told a different story. The Celt Union, meanwhile, declined. Resource surveys marked their systems as inefficient. Younger species bypassed them in trade routes. Eventually, a dominant empire noticed what others had ignored for generations: space that could be taken cheaply. The justification was clean, bureaucratic, undeniable. Protection in exchange for compliance. Development under imperial oversight. A polite annexation backed by fleets that made refusal impossible. Celt leaders debated long into failing nights. Resistance meant annihilation. Compliance meant survival without dignity. When the first imperial ships crossed their borders, no one in the galaxy expected interference. The Celt sent one message. It was not a demand. It was not even a plea. It was a record, time-stamped, verified, carrying ancient encryption keys humanity had once shared in trust. A reminder, nothing more. When it reached human space, it triggered alarms that had never once been decommissioned. Archives opened. Names were read aloud again. Old footage played in council chambers where no one spoke over it. There was no argument. No vote. Only preparation. Somewhere far from Celt space, human fleets began to move, silently, with the confidence of a species that had waited a very long time to repay a debt. Humanity did not announce its growth. It never needed to. While other species measured power through visible fleets and territorial expansion, humans learned a quieter lesson early on. Survival favored those who prepared without drawing attention. They rebuilt their civilization layer by layer, not to impress the galaxy, but to ensure they would never be helpless again. Their technology advanced in ways outsiders struggled to track. Not faster than everyone else, just differently. Human research prioritized adaptability over elegance, redundancy over efficiency. Where others built singular marvels, humans built systems that could fail and still function. Where others optimized for peacetime, humans optimized for the moment everything went wrong. Diplomatically, humanity remained unassuming. Their envoys spoke carefully, avoided strong positions, and rarely led initiatives. They participated in trade, honored treaties, and never threatened force. Galactic analysts categorized them as stable but cautious, a species still shaped by early trauma. The label suited them fine. Internally, humanity operated under a single unspoken rule: favors were not symbolic. They were binding. Every act of aid received by humanity was catalogued, verified, and preserved. Not as myth, not as propaganda, but as fact. Names mattered. Circumstances mattered. Intent mattered. A shared meal carried more weight than a signed accord if it had been given freely. This doctrine spread quietly through human institutions, becoming cultural instinct rather than written law. Time passed. Generations were born who had never seen the devastation of the expansion war, but they learned its lessons early. History lessons were blunt and unsanitized. Survival had not been guaranteed. Kindness had tipped the scales. That truth shaped how humans viewed the galaxy, not as a community, but as a ledger still being written. Beyond human space, the galaxy followed familiar patterns. Power consolidated. Borders shifted. Strong empires grew stronger by absorbing the weak under polished language and legal frameworks that disguised coercion as order. Councils debated endlessly while fleets acted decisively. It was not cruelty so much as efficiency, and efficiency rarely paused for morality. The Celt Union sat directly in the path of that efficiency. For centuries, they had survived by being uninteresting. Their systems lacked rare resources. Their worlds were harsh and unappealing. Their people were industrious but cautious, content to endure rather than expand. It had worked, until it didn't. When trade routes adjusted and resource demand shifted, Celt space became inconveniently placed and politically undefended. The dominant empire's approach was clinical. Surveys labeled Celt worlds as underutilized. Projections claimed imperial oversight would increase output and stability. Protection treaties were drafted before consent was requested. Warships arrived not as invaders, but as inevitabilities. Celt leadership attempted diplomacy. They appealed to councils, filed formal objections, requested arbitration. The responses were sympathetic but empty. No one was willing to challenge an empire over a minor union with no strategic value. The galaxy's position was clear without being spoken. This was acceptable loss. As imperial pressure increased, Kelt infrastructure was restructured. Defense arrays were disabled under supervision. Trade was redirected. Civil liberties eroded quietly, replaced with compliance metrics and oversight committees. Resistance would have justified escalation. Compliance promised survival, at least in theory. Through it all, the Kelt remembered humanity. They debated whether to reach out. Pride argued against it. Guilt whispered that they had helped without expectation, and asking now would cheapen that choice. But reality was unyielding. Their people faced slow erasure, not through violence, but through absorption. Culture dissolved just as completely that way. The message they sent was brief. It contained no accusation, no demand for intervention. It simply stated the facts as they had been, attached archival proof, and acknowledged that humanity owed them nothing. The transmission ended with a single line: acknowledgement, not rescue, would be enough. When it arrived in human space, it bypassed civilian networks and went straight to secure channels older than most active governments. Those systems had been maintained at cost for generations without ever being triggered. Until now. Human leadership convened within hours. Not as an emergency session, but as a formality. The outcome had already been decided the moment the message was authenticated. Analysts provided assessments anyway: imperial strength, probable casualties, political fallout. None of it altered the conclusion. This was not a question of strategy. It was a question of identity. Human fleets began to mobilize under standard exercises, their movements masked within routine traffic and trade convoys. Shipyards activated production lines that had never officially existed. Logistics chains rerouted resources with the precision of a species that had rehearsed this scenario in theory for centuries. No declarations were made. No ultimatums issued. To the rest of the galaxy, humanity appeared unchanged, quiet, cooperative, irrelevant. To the Kelt, nothing seemed to happen at all. Imperial forces continued their methodical tightening of control, confident that no one would interfere. They were correct about one thing. No one else would. Humanity, however, was no longer simply part of the galaxy. It was something the galaxy had never learned to account for, a species that treated memory as obligation and patience as preparation. By the time the first human ships altered course toward Kelt space, the outcome was already inevitable. The only remaining uncertainty was how long it would take for the galaxy to realize that a debt, once acknowledged by humans, was never left unpaid. The first sign that something was wrong was not an alarm or a declaration of war. It was silence. Imperial sensor networks along the Kelt frontier began losing contact with their outermost relays. Not destroyed, not jammed, simply unresponsive. Automated diagnostics reported no damage, no interference, no anomalies that fit known parameters. The systems were still there. They just weren't listening anymore. Command dismissed it as technical drift. Then shipyards stopped responding. Orbital facilities that had been operating at full capacity went dark mid-cycle. Construction frames froze in place. Power flows flattened as if deliberately throttled. Engineers attempted manual overrides and found themselves locked out by protocols that had rewritten themselves faster than organic thought could follow. Imperial fleets moved to investigate. They never formed up. As warships translated into real space, their formations unraveled almost immediately. Targeting systems failed to acquire locks. Navigation assists fed contradictory data. Vessels designed to fight as a single coordinated mass found themselves isolated, blind, and out of sync. Before commanders could issue coherent orders, precision fire tore through propulsion nodes and command spines. Human ships did not announce themselves. They did not close to traditional engagement ranges. They struck from vectors Imperial doctrine did not recognize as viable, exploiting micro-delays and assumptions baked into enemy systems over centuries of uncontested dominance. Every strike was deliberate. Weapons fire avoided population centers. No planets burned. No cities were glassed. Instead, human attacks severed supply chains, disabled fleet tenders, and collapsed communication hubs. The Empire's ability to project force dissolved piece by piece, leaving its warships intact but useless, drifting symbols of authority stripped of function. Imperial command scrambled to adapt. New frequencies were tested. Backup doctrines activated. None of it mattered. Human systems anticipated adjustments before they were fully implemented, responding with counters that suggested not just superior technology, but intimate familiarity. Observers across the galaxy watched the battle data in disbelief. This was not how wars were fought. There was no grand offensive, no overwhelming swarm. Just clean, methodical dismantling, executed with the confidence of a species that knew exactly how far it needed to go, and no further. Within 3 standard days, the Empire's forward presence in Kelt space ceased to exist as a fighting force. Only then did the humans speak. The transmission was broadcast on open channels, translated automatically into every major galactic language. It carried no threats, no demands for surrender. Just a statement of fact, delivered without emotion. They fed us when we were starving. This is interest. Nothing more followed. The message spread faster than the battle reports. Across council chambers and intelligence bureaus, analysts replayed it in stunned silence. The implications were immediate and terrifying. Humanity had not intervened for strategic gain. They had not claimed territory, resources, or political leverage. This was not expansion. This was repayment. Imperial leadership attempted to respond with force. Reserve fleets were ordered forward, only to discover that their mobilization timetables were suddenly meaningless. Logistics databases corrupted themselves. Fuel allocations misaligned. Crews arrived to ships that could not power up without tripping safety interlocks they no longer understood. Humanity did not need to defeat the entire Empire. They only needed to demonstrate that resistance would be futile, expensive, and permanent. Meanwhile, Kelt space stabilized. Imperial oversight personnel vanished from stations overnight, escorted out by human security units that appeared without warning and departed just as cleanly. Trade routes reopened under neutral protection. Disabled Kelt defenses were restored, upgraded quietly with systems that integrated seamlessly into existing frameworks. At no point did humans claim authority. They did not replace the Empire. They did not dictate governance. They did not remain in orbit longer than necessary. Their presence was precise, temporary, and absolute. For the first time in generations, the galaxy felt something unfamiliar. Uncertainty. Other powers began reassessing old assumptions. Archived interactions with humanity were reviewed. Minor encounters once dismissed as inconsequential were re-evaluated with fresh unease. Who had helped humans in the past? Who had turned them away? Who had profited from their weakness? The answers mattered now. Imperial negotiators finally secured a channel to human command. Their language was careful, restrained, heavy with appeals to stability and precedent. Humanity listened. When the reply came, it was brief and final. The Empire would withdraw fully from Kelt space. Reparations would be paid directly to the Kelt Union, not to humanity. No concessions would be demanded beyond restoration of sovereignty. Future interference would be treated not as provocation, but as bad faith. The implication was clear. There would not be a second warning. The Empire complied. Fleets pulled back under observation, their once feared armadas reduced to humbled silhouettes against the void. Treaties were amended hastily, ratified with signatures that carried the weight of recent memory. The galaxy's power balance shifted, not because humanity had conquered anyone, but because everyone now understood what they were capable of when motivated by something other than ambition. As human fleets withdrew, they left behind no monuments, no declarations of guardianship. Just functioning defenses, restored borders, and a Kelt Union suddenly aware that they were no longer alone. Across the galaxy, one truth settled in with chilling clarity. Humanity did not wage war for glory. It did not seek dominance for its own sake. But when a debt was called due, humans paid it in full, with interest calculated across stars. And now, every civilization watching understood the same thing. The most dangerous thing you could ever do was help humanity and assume they would forget. The second most dangerous thing was to find out what happened when they didn't. The aftermath was quieter than anyone expected. There were no victory broadcasts from human space, no celebrations transmitted across open channels. Human fleets withdrew along the same silent routes they had arrived, dissolving back into ordinary traffic patterns until, to an untrained observer, it was as if nothing extraordinary had occurred at all. That absence unsettled the galaxy more than any show of force could have. For the Celt Union, the change was immediate and irreversible. Imperial control structures collapsed cleanly, without sabotage or scorched infrastructure. Governance reverted to Celt authority within days. Trade restrictions were lifted. Borders were restored and reinforced with defensive systems that required no human oversight to function. The upgrades were subtle, compatible, and unmistakably advanced. Humanity did not explain them. They did not need to. Reparations arrived soon after, transferred directly from imperial accounts under binding enforcement protocols that made non-compliance impossible. The sums were significant, but not excessive. Enough to rebuild, enough to secure independence, enough to ensure survival. Not enough to create dependency. When Celt leaders attempted to formally thank humanity, the response was polite but firm. No debt existed. The account had been settled. Across the wider galaxy, the reaction unfolded more slowly. Council chambers filled with emergency sessions and closed-door briefings. Analysts rewrote threat models that had not included humanity in any meaningful way. Military doctrines were quietly amended to account for unknown variables now labeled simply as human contingencies. Trade ministers reviewed historical records with sudden interest, searching for overlooked interactions that might now carry weight. What frightened them was not human strength alone. It was human selectivity. Humanity did not intervene everywhere. Countless injustices still existed across the galaxy, untouched and unresolved. Humans did not claim the role of enforcers or moral arbiters. They did not posture as guardians of the weak. Their actions followed a logic that was deeply personal and impossible to predict from the outside. They acted only when memory demanded it. That realization changed behavior faster than any treaty ever had. Minor species found their past kindnesses resurfacing in unexpected ways: favorable trade terms, quiet technological assistance, subtle diplomatic support. Powers that had once dismissed humanity began approaching them with carefully curated goodwill, uncertain which gestures might matter someday. Human diplomats noticed. They recorded everything. Within human society, the event was marked not as triumph, but as fulfillment. Educational archives were updated. The Celt chapter was closed, annotated with a single designation: obligation honored. There was no escalation doctrine attached, no precedent claimed. Each debt stood alone, to be answered on its own terms. That distinction mattered. Because the galaxy had learned the wrong lesson at first. They believed humanity's power lay in its fleets, its weapons, its ability to dismantle empires without destroying worlds. Those things were impressive, but they were not the source. The true danger was simpler and far more alien to most civilizations. Humans remembered. They remembered who had helped when helping was costly. They remembered who had turned away when it was easy to do so. And they remembered without expiration dates, without political reinterpretation, without the erosion of time. To humans, gratitude was not emotional. It was structural. The Celt Union flourished cautiously in the years that followed. They did not expand aggressively or seek influence beyond their borders. They focused on rebuilding culture, restoring confidence, and teaching their children the full truth of what had happened. Not to glorify humanity, but to understand consequence. They taught that kindness had echoed farther than anyone could have imagined. Elsewhere, empires adjusted their tone. Expansion slowed. Annexations grew more carefully worded, more legally defensible, more restrained. It was not fear of immediate retaliation that tempered them, but uncertainty. No one could be sure which forgotten act might one day be remembered by humans. And that uncertainty reshaped the galaxy. Humanity returned to its quiet place among the stars, outwardly unchanged. Trade flowed. Diplomacy continued. No new alliances were announced. No borders shifted in their favor. To casual observers, the incident faded into history like any other conflict. But among those who paid attention, one truth settled permanently. Humanity did not measure power the way others did. They did not chase dominance or prestige. They did not require recognition to validate their actions. They operated on a ledger older than their rise to prominence, written in survival and sealed by memory. A favor given to humanity was never lost. It waited. And when repayment came, it arrived not as charity, not as mercy, but as certainty, precise, overwhelming, and unavoidable. The galaxy learned to fear many things. But above all else, it learned to respect the one thing mankind never abandoned, even when they were weak, forgotten, and burning. They remembered.